In December of 1971, history was made as Intelsat conducted the first ever transatlantic satellite video telephone call connecting Sweden and Washington, D.C. This groundbreaking event celebrated the opening of our Tanum Sweden teleport. The call was powered by the Intelsat IV satellite. The call involved another first, the first transatlantic video call using sign language with Dr. Yerker Andersson from Washington, D.C.'s Gallaudet University, a world-renowned leader in education for the deaf and hard of hearing. What was Dr. Andersson's background?
Yerker Andersson's background was that he was born in Sweden, graduated school there, and then moved to the US in 1955 to attend Gallaudet University and got a master's degree from Columbia University, and then started working at Gallaudet as a sociology professor.
So no technical or engineering background where he would be a shoo-in for the satellite communications aspect of this.
I think that probably the reason that he was chosen was because the project was involved in Sweden, and so there was a connection with Sweden. And they actually did not use American Sign Language. They used Swedish Sign Language on that call. So I think that he was a natural selection due to that.
Did the video call work on the first try?
Apparently, it was quite awkward and hard to communicate. I mean, right now we've got amazing cameras and, very high-speed bandwidth, but at that time they did not have that. And so the people had to sign very close to their faces in order to be able to be seen and understood. The first domestic picture call took place at the World's Fair in 1964, but it was just an example of what was possible. Even text telephone, also known as TTY, wasn't widely used by the deaf community. Interestingly enough, TTYs actually were not allowed to be used internationally at that time. The FCC did not permit that. So in 1964, we had this invention, but it didn't really become popular until several years later, in part because the phone companies did not want people using TTYs because it was associated with their business, and they felt that if you're using a TTY, then it's for business purposes, and therefore we don't want to allow this. At that time, TTYs were about the size of a US mailbox, the blue mailbox that you see for USPS. It was about that big, and not many people had them. And international calls weren't permitted until 1975, and only then allowed because deaf people lobbied Congress for the right to be able to make the same calls that hearing people were able to make.
Wow. So there was no way for a deaf person to contact relatives abroad prior to this time.
Yeah, typically had to call through a hearing neighbor. While
Intelsat's international video call was a success, that technology was also just an example of what was possible. The deaf community would have to wait for other technologies to catch up.
In 1971, we had the Intelsat event, but actual video communications, like regular communications, happened around 2000. And the reason for that is because we finally had high-speed internet. And so around the 1980s, research was done to see how fast the bandwidth would need to be in order to actually see signing and to be able to understand it and to communicate using it. And the world didn't catch up to that speed until about 2000 and made it possible for actual video calls to happen. And then, of course, the technology took off. I think that it's really important to recognize that video communication is the best way for many deaf people, certainly not all, but many deaf people prefer to communicate within our natural language. It's faster than typing, certainly faster than a TTY, and it is our natural language. And so we're grateful to have the opportunity to communicate using technology that allows us to use sign language.